Outside, the town stirred slowly. Fishermen returned with their morning catch. Neighbors waved from porches, coffee mugs in hand. Life here moved gently, humbly, just how Elena had always known it. But today was different. Her hand rested on her stomach, barely noticeable beneath her soft cotton dress. Yet she felt the change deep within. A flutter, a whisper of life. She had taken the test that morning, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. 2 pink lines, a future blooming in secret. "Lord," she whispered, voice trembling, "I don't know what to do, but I trust you." Footsteps echoed softly behind her. She didn't turn. She knew that rhythm, Pastora Miriam's steady, comforting stride. "Elena?" the older woman said gently, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. "You've been here since dawn." Elena opened her eyes, tears already glistening. "I'm pregnant, Miriam." The pastor knelt beside her, her face softening with understanding. "And Daniel? Does he know?" Elena's breath hitched. She looked down, her throat tight. "I told him last night." "What did he say?" A silence stretched, heavy with unspoken pain. "He said, 'This isn't the life he imagined,'" she whispered. "That he needs something more, something bigger." Miriam's eyes darkened with sorrow, but she squeezed Elena's hand. "And what do you need, child?" Elena swallowed hard, her gaze drifting to the stained glass window above the altar. A dove descending in rays of light. "I need to believe that God's plan is enough," she said, voice gaining strength. "Even if Daniel walks away, even if the world says I'm not enough, I know whose I am." Unseen by anyone in Cedar Cove, and unknown even to Daniel, Elena carried more than a child. She carried a legacy. Decades ago, her grandfather, a devout Christian businessman, had amassed a quiet fortune through ethical investments, humble living, and unwavering faith. On his deathbed, he'd made her promise. "Never let money define your worth. Use it only when God opens the door." So she lived simply, teaching music at the church, volunteering at the community kitchen, driving a 10-year-old sedan. To the world, she was just Elena. Kind, quiet, unassuming. But behind the scenes, trusts waited. Foundations stood ready. Assets lay dormant, until the day God called her to activate them. Now, with a baby growing inside her and a husband pulling away, that day felt closer than ever. Later that afternoon, as she walked home along the seaside path, the wind tugged at her hair. She paused at the overlook, watching waves crash against the rocks below. A seagull cried overhead. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. "I'm not afraid," she said aloud. Not to the sky, but to the one who held her future. "I may be alone in this moment, but I'm not alone." Back in the city, miles away, Daniel stood on the balcony of his penthouse, phone pressed to his ear. Leah's laughter tinkled through the speaker. Bright, polished, effortless. "You'll love tonight's performance, Danny," she said. "I'm singing that new song, Higher Ground. It's going viral." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, sounds great." He glanced at the photo on his desk. Elena, barefoot in the garden, laughing as sunlight caught in her hair. The memory stung. "You okay?" Leah asked, sensing his distance. "Just tired," he muttered. "Work's been heavy." But the truth weighed heavier. He'd walked away from something real for something that glittered, and already, the glitter was fading. Elena didn't know it yet, but her quiet faith was about to shake more than just her own world. And Daniel? He had no idea the woman he'd left behind wasn't just carrying his child, she was carrying a kingdom. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for desenvolve. Mi conti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como su fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com vida moco. Com muitos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear, de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters quen 3 max 2 years before the storm, before the silence, before the empty side of the bed. There was a wedding under strings of fairy lights, laughter echoing across a vineyard, and a man who believed he'd finally found peace. His name was Daniel Whitmore. To the world, he was the self-made billionaire, the tech visionary who built an empire from a dorm room idea. Magazines called him the architect of tomorrow. Investors begged for his attention. At galas, he wore confidence like a tailored suit. Sharp, polished, untouchable. But inside, there was a hollow space no boardroom victory could fill. He met Elena at a charity dinner, his charity dinner, hosted in a glass-walled ballroom overlooking the city skyline. She wasn't there as a guest. She was there playing piano in the corner, her fingers dancing over the keys with quiet grace, her eyes lowered, her presence almost invisible amid the clinking champagne flutes and forced smiles. Yet he saw her, not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't need it. He approached her after the final note faded. "You played like you were praying," he said, surprising himself with the words. She looked up, startled, then smiled soft, genuine. "I was." That night he couldn't sleep, not because of stock prices or mergers, but because of the way her voice had carried something he hadn't heard in years: sincerity. They started slowly: coffee, long walks, conversations that lasted until sunrise. She never asked about his net worth, never flattered him. Instead, she asked, "What makes your soul tired, Daniel?" And for the first time, he admitted it. "I feel like I'm running, but I don't know toward what." They married in spring. A small ceremony. No press. Just family, friends, and vows spoken beneath an oak tree. Hands clasped, eyes shining with hope. The early months were golden. Elena brought light into his sterile penthouse. Fresh flowers on the table. Hymns humming in the kitchen. Candles lit not for ambience, but for prayer. She'd wake before dawn, journal in hand, whispering scriptures like love letters to God. First, Daniel found it beautiful, then confusing, then constricting. "You don't want to come to the Monaco Gala?" he asked one evening, loosening his tie, voice edged with frustration. "Half the Fortune 500 will be there." Elena looked up from her Bible, her expression gentle but firm. "I'd rather be here, Daniel, with you, not performing for them." "But don't you want to be someone?" he pressed, pacing the living room. "You're married to me. You could have influence, platforms, everything." She stood, placing a hand on his arm. "I am someone. I'm Elena, and I'm enough, just as I am." He pulled away. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Distance. The world he'd built demanded noise, speed, spectacle. But Elena moved in stillness. She spoke of contentment when he craved conquest. She gave money away when he hoarded deals. She forgave quickly. He kept ledgers of slights. And slowly, without either of them noticing, the bridge between them began to crack. Then came Leah Moreau. She sang at a high-profile gospel benefit. One Daniel attended alone, claiming Elena wasn't feeling well. She'd been praying for a sick neighbor. Leah's voice was electric, soulful, soaring, dripping with passion. She wore a crimson dress that caught every camera flash, and when she locked eyes with Daniel during the chorus of "Break Every Chain," something shifted in him. After the show, she approached him backstage, radiant, unafraid. "You're Daniel Whitmore," she said, not as a question, but as a revelation. "Your foundation changed my brother's life." He smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. They talked, not about God, but about impact. Not about humility, but about legacy. She understood his language: ambition, visibility, relevance. "You're wasting your light in the shadows," she told him one night over rooftop wine. The city glittering below like scattered stars. "You were made for more than quiet dinners and Sunday school." He didn't correct her, because part of him believed it. Back home, Elena noticed the change. The late nights, the distracted glances, the way he flinched when she reached for his hand. One rainy evening, she sat across from him at the kitchen table, steam rising from 2 untouched mugs of tea. "Daniel," she said softly, Are you still happy here? He stared into his cup, jaw tight. I don't know what here even is anymore, Elena. It's small. Her breath caught, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Small doesn't mean empty. But it feels like I'm disappearing, he admitted, voice raw. Like I married a life that's slowly erasing me. She reached across the table, fingers trembling. Or maybe you're just afraid of being seen as you truly are, without the money, the name, the power. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a heartbeat, he saw the woman who'd held him when his father died, who'd fasted and prayed over his company during its darkest hour, who'd loved him not for what he had, but for the broken pieces he tried to hide. But the moment passed, because the world outside whispered louder, and he chose to listen. He didn't know it then. But in choosing noise over stillness, glitter over grace, he was walking away not just from his wife, but that moment never came. Instead, she heard his car pull into the driveway too late that night, well past midnight, and the sharp scent of expensive cologne and someone else's perfume clung to his coat when he finally stepped inside. He didn't look at her as he hung it up, just loosened his tie, exhaustion and something else. Euphoria? Guilt? Etched into the lines of his face. Daniel, she said, voice barely above a whisper. He paused. Yeah. She stood, wrapping her arms around herself though the room was warm. I need to tell you something. He turned, finally meeting her eyes. But his gaze was distant, as if he were already somewhere else. Somewhere brighter, louder, more dazzling. Can it wait? He asked, running a hand through his hair. I've got a call with Singapore in 2 hours. Her breath hitched, the words caught in her throat like thorns. But she swallowed them down and nodded. Of course. She turned away before he could see the tears forming. But not before she whispered to the silence. You're going to be a father. He didn't hear her. The next morning, she found him at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone, a half-empty cup of black coffee beside him. Leah's face glowed on the screen, smiling, radiant, captioned, "Blessed beyond measure, grateful for divine connections." Elena's stomach twisted, but she set a plate in front of him. Scrambled eggs, whole wheat toast, the way he liked it. He didn't say thank you. Instead, he looked up, eyes sharp. Elena, we need to talk. Her hands stilled. Okay. He exhaled, as if gathering courage or shedding guilt. I can't keep pretending. This life is suffocating me. I feel like I'm disappearing in it. She didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. I've met someone, he said, voice low but steady. Someone who sees me, who challenges me, who doesn't want me to shrink myself to fit into some quiet little box. Her lips trembled, but she forced them into stillness. And what about us? What about me? You're incredible, he said quickly, too quickly. You're kind, faithful, everything people say a good wife should be. But I don't feel anything anymore. It's like we're strangers sharing a roof. She looked down at her hands. Hands that had held his through panic attacks, through boardroom betrayals, through nights when the weight of his world threatened to crush him. You felt something once, she said softly. I did, he admitted. But feelings change. She closed her eyes. In that moment, she didn't pray for a miracle. She prayed for strength. When she opened them, her voice was clear, calm, anchored in something deeper than pain. Then go. He blinked. What? If your heart is already gone, don't stay out of obligation. God doesn't honor chains. He honors truth. He stared at her, stunned by her grace. Elena, I didn't mean... It's okay, she said, stepping back. Just don't look back. 2 days later, he moved out. The penthouse felt cavernous without him. But Elena didn't fill the silence with noise. She filled it with prayer. It was the following Sunday, during worship at church, that the truth finally settled in her spirit with undeniable clarity. She was carrying his child. She sat in the back pew, tears streaming silently down her cheeks as the choir sang. He restores the years the locusts have eaten. Pastora Miriam found her afterward, kneeling beside her in the empty sanctuary. You're not alone, Mija, the older woman said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Elena leaned into her, voice breaking. I feel like I failed him, like I wasn't enough. No, Miriam said firmly. You were exactly what he needed, but he wasn't ready to receive it. You did the right thing, Danny, she said. You can't build a future on guilt. He ran a hand over his face, exhaustion gnawing at his bones. It didn't feel right, Leah. It felt like tearing out part of myself. That's just the old you clinging on, she countered gently. Elena lived in a world that doesn't exist anymore. You need someone who moves at your speed. He didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the box in the corner. Elena's things, packed hastily by his assistant at his request. A sweater she'd knitted last winter. A framed photo from their honeymoon in Tuscany. A small leather-bound journal with her handwriting, scripture, prayers, dreams. He hadn't opened it. Couldn't. Instead, he turned away and poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the glow of the skyline. Meanwhile, across town, Elena stood in the doorway of a modest cottage on the edge of Cedar Cove. White picket fence, climbing roses, and a porch swing that creaked in the evening breeze. It had belonged to her grandmother, untouched for years, waiting like a promise. She set her suitcase down and placed a hand on her stomach. We're home, she whispered. No grand announcement, no dramatic exit, just quiet resolve. The next morning, Daniel's lawyer called. Mr. Whitmore, your wife declined the settlement. Daniel frowned. What do you mean, declined? It was generous. She said she doesn't want anything from you. Not money, not property, not even legal support. She only asked that you not contact her unless absolutely necessary. Daniel went still. Did she say why? There was a pause. She said, let him go freely. I have everything I need. He hung up, heart pounding oddly, as if something vital had just slipped through his fingers, not with a crash, but with silence. He tried to convince himself it was relief, freedom, but that night, as he lay in a king-sized bed in a room full of things and empty of meaning, he heard the echo of Elena's voice during their vows. I choose you, not for what you have, but for who you are. And now, who was he? 2 weeks later, Leah hosted a private showcase at the Velvet Note, an upscale lounge known for its gospel meets jazz nights. Daniel sat in the front row, surrounded by influencers and tech elites, clapping politely as she closed her set with a soaring rendition of Redeemed. Afterward, glittering in a silver gown, she joined him at his table, radiant. You're quiet tonight, she said, sipping champagne. I keep thinking about her, he admitted, surprising himself. Leah's smile didn't falter, but her eyes cooled. Elena? Why? She didn't fight, didn't beg, didn't even take a dime. It's like she knew something I didn't. Leah leaned in, voice low. Or maybe she just knew she couldn't win. But Daniel wasn't so sure. Back in Cedar Cove, Elena sat on the porch at dusk, the journal open on her lap. She wasn't writing about Daniel anymore. She was writing to her child. My sweet one, your father made a choice, but that doesn't define you. You are loved by God before you took your first breath. And one day, you'll understand that true strength isn't in holding on. It's in letting go with dignity. Inside the house, a letter lay on the kitchen table, unopened, but heavy with destiny. It bore the seal of Marquez Holdings, Limited, and the words, per your grandfather's directive, activation protocol initiated upon confirmed pregnancy. She hadn't read it yet, not because she feared what it contained, but because she was waiting for the right time. The God-appointed time. She didn't know it, but Daniel would soon learn the truth in the most unexpected way. Not through headlines or lawsuits, but through a quiet act of mercy that would unravel everything he thought he knew about power, worth, and love. Her and in the world around her. But on the fourth morning, with golden light spilling through the lace curtains and birds singing in the old magnolia tree, she sat down, unfolded the thick parchment, and read. By the last will and spiritual directive of Samuel Marquez, upon confirmation of pregnancy, Elena Marquez is hereby entrusted with full control of the Marquez Legacy Trust, including real estate holdings, ethical investment portfolios, the Harbor Light Foundation, and the Cedar Cove Community Development Fund. May she steward this gift not for glory, but for grace. Her breath caught, not because of the numbers, though they were staggering, but because of the timing. God hadn't just provided, He'd prepared. That afternoon, she walked to the church, not as a woman abandoned, but as one appointed. Pastora Miriam met her at the gate, eyes widening as Elena handed her a copy of the trust summary. Redacted, but unmistakable. "You're not just Elena the widow's granddaughter anymore," Miriam said, voice hushed with awe. "You're a steward of a kingdom." Elena nodded, tears welling. "But I don't want anyone to know. Not yet. If this gets out, Daniel will think I stayed silent to manipulate him. Leah will twist it into a scandal. And this baby?" She placed a hand on her stomach. "I want his first memories to be of love, not headlines." Miriam embraced her tightly. "Then we walk in wisdom, not secrecy, but sacred discretion." Meanwhile, in the city, Daniel sat in a boardroom that felt colder than ever. The quarterly reports were strong, but the investors were restless. "Your focus has been scattered," said Mr. Langford, his oldest advisor, peering over his glasses. "Whitmore Innovations used to stand for disruption with integrity. Now, people whisper you're chasing fame more than function." Daniel clenched his jaw. "I'm building something bigger, or losing what you already had," Langford murmured, turning away. That night, unable to sleep, Daniel found himself scrolling through old photos. Elena laughing in the rain, barefoot in the garden, singing off-key at Christmas Eve service. He missed the way she'd hum while cooking, the way she'd leave little notes in his briefcase. "Be brave, be kind." He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over her contact. But what would he say? "Sorry I chose a spotlight over your soul?" He put the phone down. The next week, news broke. A devastating storm had hit the northern coast. Homes destroyed, families displaced. Among the hardest hit areas was Cedar Cove. Daniel's foundation was expected to respond. But when he reviewed the relief proposals, one name stood out. Harbor Light Initiative, led by E.M. His pulse quickened. "Elena?" He dug deeper. The initiative wasn't flashy. No press releases. Just clean water, warm meals, temporary housing. All coordinated with military precision and quiet generosity. And funded entirely by an anonymous donor. Except the logo, a white dove over an anchor, the same one from her grandfather's old shipping company. He stared at the screen, a cold realization spreading through him. What if she never needed me at all? Back in Cedar Cove, Elena stood in the mud-soaked yard of a flooded home, helping an elderly couple salvage photo albums and family Bibles. Rain soaked her hair, but she didn't care. "You're too kind, child," the old woman said, tears mixing with rain. "Who are you, really?" Elena smiled softly. "Just someone who knows what it means to be helped when you have nothing left." Later, as she drove home in her aging sedan, headlights cutting through the mist, she passed a billboard on the highway. Leah's face glowing under the slogan, "Rising in Grace." Beneath it, a tiny disclaimer, proudly sponsored by Whitmore Impact Fund. Elena didn't flinch. She just turned up the hymn playing on the radio, "Great is thy faithfulness," and whispered, "Keep me humble, Lord. Keep me hidden until you say otherwise." Unseen by the world, her legacy was already moving. Building shelters, funding clinics, restoring hope. And Daniel? He was beginning to wonder if the woman he'd left behind wasn't just she wasn't alone anymore. Not in spirit and not in practice. Pastora Miriam had quietly mobilized the congregation, assigning tasks with the precision of a general and the tenderness of a mother. "Elena handles strategy," she told the volunteers. "You bring the hands. She'll bring the heart." But some weren't so kind. At the grocery store, a woman Elena once knew from Daniel's charity galas, now relocated to the coast, stared as she passed, whispering to her friend, "That's the one he left, pregnant and penniless." Can you imagine? Elena kept walking, chin high, but her fingers trembled around the handle of her basket. Later that afternoon, sitting on the church steps with a thermos of ginger tea, she finally let the tears fall, silent, hot, born not of shame, but of loneliness. Miriam found her there, wrapped in a thick shawl, eyes red-rimmed. "They think I'm broken," Elena whispered, "that I'm surviving on scraps and pity." Miriam sat beside her, the wood creaking under their weight. "Let them think it. Truth doesn't need applause. But what if my child hears those things someday?" Her voice cracked. "What if he wonders why his father walked away, and why his mother had nothing to show for it?" Miriam turned, cupping Elena's face in weathered hands. "Listen to me, Mija. Your worth was never in Daniel's choice, and your legacy isn't in what you show. It's in what you build, and you're already building something eternal." Just then, a battered pickup pulled into the church driveway. Out stepped Mr. Henry, the town's retired carpenter, followed by two young men carrying toolboxes. "Pastor said you needed hands for the Johnson place," Henry called, his voice gruff but warm. "We're here." Elena blinked. "But I didn't ask you." "You didn't have to," he said, tipping his cap. "We saw what you did after the storm. Fed half the town, didn't you? Even brought soup to old Mrs. Peabody when her stove died. Folks talk, Elena, but not all talk is poison. Some of us see grace when it walks past." And just like that, the tide began to turn. The very people who once pitied her now looked to her with quiet respect. Not because of wealth, no one knew the truth yet, but because of how she carried herself, with dignity in hardship, generosity without fanfare, and a peace that made no earthly sense. One evening, as Elena reviewed blueprints for a new community kitchen, funded discreetly through the Harbor Light Initiative, she received a call from Abigail Chen, her grandfather's longtime attorney. "Elena," Abigail said, voice calm but urgent, "the board has approved your proposal to convert the old Marquez warehouse into a multi-use relief center. Construction can begin next month." Elena's breath caught. "But no press, no announcements." "Understood. But you'll need to sign in person. And there's something else." A pause. "Daniel Whitmore's foundation just applied for a partnership grant with Harbor Light." Elena went still. "What?" "They want to co-fund the medical outreach wing. Said they're inspired by your model." She closed her eyes. Of course he would. Efficient. Strategic. Still treating life like a transaction. "What should I do?" she asked. Abigail's voice softened. "That's not my decision, Elena. But remember, God doesn't waste pain. Maybe this is how he draws your paths back together. Not as husband and wife, but as co-laborers in something greater." That night, as snow began to fall, soft, silent, covering the scars of the storm, Elena knelt by her bed, hands resting on her belly. Shed. On his desk, a single sheet of paper. The Harbor Light Initiative's partnership proposal. Elena's handwriting, elegant, restrained, on the cover letter. "We serve in the name of Christ, not for recognition, but for restoration." He'd read it 3 times, each word cut deeper than the last. Leah swept in, heels clicking against marble, her sequin dress catching the ambient light like shattered glass. "There you are. I've been calling. The gala's in 2 weeks. You haven't even approved my outfit yet." He didn't turn. "Cancel it." She froze. "What?" "The gala. Cancel it. Donate the budget to the Cedar Cove Relief Fund." Leah stared at him, incredulous. "Are you serious? That event is my launchpad for the new album. You promised visibility." "I promised a lot of things," he said quietly, finally facing her. "But I'm starting to wonder if I've been selling something I don't even believe in anymore." Her eyes narrowed. "This is about her, isn't it?" "Elena." He didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. Leah stepped closer, voice dropping to a velvet threat. "Don't be a fool, Daniel. She's playing you. That little cottage? The humble act? I heard rumors. She's got old money. Maybe even more than you." He flinched. "That's not why I'm doing this." "Then why?" she pressed. "Because she's pregnant with your baby? Because she prays prettier than I sing?" He looked at her, really looked, and saw what he'd been too dazzled to notice before. The calculation behind the smile, the ambition masquerading as devotion. "You don't care about the people you claim to serve," he said, voice low but firm. "You care about the stage they put you on." Her face hardened. "And you're just chasing a ghost of the woman you threw away." She turned and left, the door clicking shut like a verdict. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. Instead, he dug through old emails, financial records, public filings, anything that might confirm or deny Leah's accusation. And there it was, a footnote in a decade-old business journal. Samuel Marquez, founder of Marquez Shipping, leaves estate in trust to sole granddaughter, Elena Marquez, with conditions of anonymity until fulfillment of familial covenant. His hands shook. She hadn't just lived simply, she'd chosen it. Even when she could have owned half the city, she'd scrubbed floors at the church kitchen. Even when she could have demanded security, she'd walked away with nothing but her faith and his child. And he'd called her small. The next morning, he called his CFO. Divest from all non-essential entertainment partnerships. Redirect 50% of personal assets into ethical community development funds, starting with Cedar Cove. His assistant paled. "Sir, the board will revolt." "Let them," Daniel said, staring out the window again. "I'd rather lose everything than keep living a lie." Meanwhile, in Cedar Cove, Elena felt a strange shift in the air, like the quiet before a reckoning. She'd just returned from the clinic, swollen ankles and a heart full of anticipation. The doctor had said the baby was strong, healthy, growing fast. As she stepped onto her porch, Pastor Miriam was waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "He applied," Miriam said without greeting. Elena didn't need to ask who. "Daniel. He wants to visit the relief site. Says he's reassessing his legacy." Miriam's voice was laced with skepticism. "Do you want him here?" Elena looked down at her hands. Hands that had kneaded bread for widows, held the hands of grieving mothers, written checks that could rebuild a town. Then she placed them gently on her belly. "If he comes," she said softly, "let him see what love builds when pride walks away." But in her heart, a quiet warning stirred. Because she knew better than anyone that redemption wasn't just about showing up. It was about staying. And Daniel? He hadn't stayed last time. Now, as snow melted into early spring and the first crocuses pushed through the damp earth, two lives moved toward collision. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but PPLY shed. Designer loafers abandoned in the car. He'd expected scaffolding, chaos, maybe a few volunteers in matching t-shirts. Instead, he found order born of purpose. Solar panels rising over rebuilt homes, children laughing in a freshly painted playground, a mobile clinic humming with quiet efficiency. And then he saw her. Elena stood near a row of saplings they just planted. Oak, her favorite, her hands resting on the small of her back, speaking gently to a young mother holding a toddler. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, her coat patched at the elbow. But there was a light around her that had nothing to do with the spring sun. She hadn't noticed him yet. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as she knelt, despite her swollen belly, and adjusted the child's crooked hat, whispering something that made the little girl giggle. Then, as if sensing his presence, she looked up. Their eyes met. Time didn't stop, but something deeper did, the illusion that he could walk in here like a benefactor and leave unchanged. She straightened slowly, expression unreadable. No anger, no tears, just stillness. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, voice calm but distant. "You weren't expected until Thursday." "I wanted to see it with my own eyes," he said, stepping closer. "Not through reports, not through photos." "And what do you see?" He glanced around, at the rebuilt porch of the Johnson home, at the community garden's sprouting rows of kale and marigolds, at the mural on the side of the new education trailer. "Let your light shine." "I see what you built," he said quietly, "while I was chasing applause." She didn't flinch. "We built it together. The town, the church, God." He hesitated. "Elena, I didn't know." "Know what?" Her voice was gentle but firm. "That I had resources?" or that I chose not to use them to trap you? He looked down, shame warming his cheeks. Both. She took a slow breath, wind lifting a strand of hair across her face. My grandfather taught me that wealth is a stewardship, not a weapon. I didn't hide it to deceive you, Daniel. I hid it because I wanted you to love me. Not a name, not a balance sheet. He swallowed hard. I failed you. You failed yourself, she corrected softly. But it's not too late to choose differently. Just then, Mr. Henry approached, wiping his hands on a rag. Elena, the plumbing in Unit 3 is acting up again. He stopped short when he saw Daniel. Oh, didn't realize we had company. It's fine, Henry, Elena said, turning back to Daniel. You're welcome to tour the site. But know this, if you're here to reclaim something, you'll leave empty. But if you're here to serve, there's always work to be done. And with that, she walked away, one hand on her belly, the other lifting to brush a tear she wouldn't let fall. Daniel stood there, hollowed out and rearranged. Later that evening, alone in his rented room above the hardware store. No five-star suite, no room service. He opened his laptop and typed a single email to his legal team. Initiate full audit of Whitmore Innovations. Identify every contract, partnership, or investment that compromises ethical integrity. Terminate them. Effective immediately. He didn't stop there. He called Abigail Chin. I need your help, he said, voice raw. Not as a lawyer, as someone who knew her grandfather. There was a pause. Go on. I want to create a new foundation, one that mirrors Harbor Light's values. No branding, no press, just impact. And I want Elena to lead it. Not me, her. Abigail was silent for a long moment. She won't trust you, Daniel. I don't expect her to. But maybe one day she'll see I'm trying. Back in her cottage, Elena sat by lamplight, rereading the trust documents. The next phase was ready. Activate the Marquez Legacy Fund for national outreach. But something held her back. Not fear, discernment. Because a part of her wondered, was Daniel's change real? Or just another performance? That night, as rain began to fall again, she placed a hand on her belly and whispered, God, if this is your hand moving, let it be for healing, not heartbreak. And miles away, Daniel stared at the ceiling, wondering if the woman he'd abandoned was the only one who could show him how to come home. An evening of Hope Harbor Light Spring Gala, benefiting maternal and child wellness initiatives. No names, no sponsors listed, just a date, a location, the historic Cedar Cove Grand Hall, and a quiet promise. All are welcome, no cameras, no press. Daniel stared at it for a full minute, heart pounding with something between dread and longing. He hadn't seen Elena in person since that day on the relief site, only brief updates through Abigail, who now acted as a fragile bridge between their worlds. He knew she wouldn't expect him to come, but he also knew if he didn't show up now, he might never get another chance. Leah, however, had other plans. She called the moment she heard about the gala from a mutual contact in the philanthropy circuit. You're not seriously going, are you? She asked, voice sharp with disbelief. It's a charity event, he said evenly. I'm a donor. It's her stage, Leah snapped. Don't be naive. She's unveiling something big. Everyone's whispering about it. And you? You'll be sitting in the back like some repentant ghost. Maybe that's exactly where I belong, he said quietly. Silence crackled over the line. Then colder. If you go, don't expect me to be there when you return. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The night of the gala, rain threatened but held back, as if even the sky respected the moment. Daniel arrived early, dressed simply in a dark suit without a tie, standing near the back as guests filtered in. Local families, nurses, teachers, volunteers. No celebrities, no flashbulbs, just people who'd lost much and found hope. Then the lights dimmed. Soft piano music filled the hall. Elena's favorite hymn, Be Thou My Vision. And there at the front stood Elena, not on a podium, not behind a lectern, just standing, radiant in a modest ivory dress that draped gently over her full belly, her hair loose, her eyes clear and calm. Daniel's breath caught. She looked whole, not broken, not bitter, whole. "Thank you for being here," she began, voice warm but steady, carrying to every corner of the room. "Tonight isn't about me. It's about the single mothers who work 2 jobs and still tuck their children in with love. It's about the babies born into uncertainty but wrapped in prayers that never stop. It's about the truth that grace rebuilds what pride destroys." Applause rose, soft, sincere. Then she stepped aside, and a screen lit up with images. New clinics opening in 3 states, mobile prenatal units, scholarships for young women in crisis pregnancies, all funded by the newly launched Marquez Legacy Outreach. Daniel's stomach dropped. He recognized the logo, the strategy, the quiet power. This wasn't just charity. It was a movement. And then she said the words that froze his blood. None of this would be possible without the faithful partnership of those who chose integrity over image and service over status. His pulse roared in his ears. Was she talking about him? Just then, Leah appeared at his side, elegant in emerald silk, smile polished, eyes sharp as glass. "Fancy meeting you here," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "Come to see what you walked away from." He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on Elena, who had just turned and saw him. For a heartbeat, the room vanished. It was just the 2 of them, across a sea of folding chairs and fractured history. Her expression didn't change. No shock, no anger, just recognition. Then she smiled, a small, private thing, and nodded slightly as if to say, "You came. That's enough." Leah leaned in, voice low and urgent. "Don't make a scene. Don't go to her. You'll only embarrass yourself and her." But Daniel wasn't thinking about appearances anymore. He was thinking about the child she carried, about the legacy she built in silence, about the man he used to be, and the man he might still become. As the evening concluded with a communal blessing, guests began to mingle. Elena moved slowly through the crowd, accepting hugs, answering questions, always with that quiet light around her. Daniel took a step forward, then another. But before he could reach her, Pastora Miriam appeared like a gentle barrier, hand resting on his arm. "She's not here to be rescued, Daniel," the older woman said softly. "She's here to lead. If you want to walk beside her, you'll have to learn to follow." He stopped, swallowed, nodded, and for the first time he understood. This wasn't his redemption to claim. It was hers to offer. And as he watched Elena laugh softly with a young mother, one hand resting on the life growing inside her, he knew with aching clarity that the woman he'd left behind wasn't just an heir to a fortune. She was the heir to something far greater, a kingdom built on faith, forgiveness, and unshakable love. Ace rebuilds what pride destroys. He'd heard sermons with more fire, but none that had cut so close to bone. Inside, volunteers were clearing tables, folding chairs, packing leftover meals for the shelter. He should have helped, but he'd stayed rooted, afraid that if he moved, he'd do something wrong, say something clumsy, reach out too soon, shatter the fragile peace she'd built. Then he saw her. Elena stepped out through the side door, wrapped in a soft shawl, one hand resting on her belly as she paused to breathe in the night air. She hadn't seen him yet. He stood slowly, heart hammering like a man approaching sacred ground. When she turned and saw him, she didn't flinch, didn't retreat. She simply waited. "Elena," he said, voice rough with everything he hadn't said in months. "Daniel." Her tone was calm, but her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, held the weight of everything unsaid between them. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he began, stepping closer but keeping distance. "I just needed to hear you speak tonight, to see you lead. You were never small. I was just too blind to see your size." She looked down, then back up, moonlight catching the unshed tears in her lashes. "Why are you really here, Daniel?" "Because I heard you pray before you spoke," he said, voice cracking. "When you bowed your head and whispered, 'Lord, let my words carry your love, not my pain.' I remembered the woman who used to pray over my nightmares. The one who held me when I thought I'd lost everything. He swallowed hard. I didn't just lose you. I lost myself. She was silent for a long moment, the wind rustling the trees like a chorus of witnesses. You hurt me, she said softly, not just by leaving, but by acting like the life we built. The quiet mornings, the shared silences, the way I loved you without needing to be seen, wasn't enough. It was enough, he said quickly. It was everything. I just got lost in the noise. Just then, Leah's voice sliced through the night from the parking lot. Daniel, there you are. She strode toward them in heels that clicked like warnings, her smile tight. I've been calling. The car's waiting. She didn't look at Elena. Not really. Just flicked her eyes over her with practiced dismissal. Daniel turned to her, voice low but firm. I'm not coming. Leah's smile faltered. What? I said I'm not coming. Not tonight. Not like this. Her eyes flashed. Don't be ridiculous. You think standing here in the dark changes anything? She's not going to take you back because you showed up with guilt in your pocket. Elena didn't react, but Daniel did. He stepped between them, not aggressively, but with quiet authority. You don't speak for her, and you don't get to define my path anymore. Leah stared at him, stunned. Then her lips curled into something bitter. Fine, but don't come crawling back when your little redemption fantasy collapses. She turned and left, her heels echoing into silence. When Daniel turned back, Elena was watching him. Not with hope, not with anger, but with discernment. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did, he replied. Because for the first time, I chose you, not the version of you I wanted, but the real you. The one who forgives but doesn't forget. Who builds while others break. Who carries my child even though I didn't deserve to be his father. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. I've prayed for you every night, Daniel. Not for you to come back to me, but for you to come back to truth. He took one careful step closer. Is there room for me in that truth? Not as your husband, not yet, but as the father of your child. She looked at him for a long, trembling moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed his hand gently over her stomach. He's been waiting for you, she whispered, and beneath his palm, as if on cue, the baby kicked, soft, firm, alive. Daniel's breath broke. He dropped to his knees right there on the cold stone, forehead nearly touching her belly, tears streaming freely now. I'm sorry, he choked out. I'm so sorry I missed it all. Elena didn't pull away. She let him weep, not for pity, but for the sacred act of repentance. Behind them, the hall lights flickered off one by one. The world moved on, but in that quiet corner of the night, something new began. Not with a vow, not with a promise, but with a Daniel didn't move back in. He didn't ask to. Instead, he rented a small room above the Cedar Cove bookstore, volunteered at the Harbor Light site 3 times a week, and showed up every Sunday at the early service. Always in the back row, always alone, always watching Elena from a distance as she sang in the choir, one hand resting on her belly, the other lifted in worship. He hadn't touched her since that night on the steps. But he'd begun to show up, consistently, humbly, without expectation. And then the storm hit, not the kind that floods streets, but the kind that floods the body. It was just past midnight when Elena woke gasping, a sharp pain radiating from her side like lightning through calm water. She tried to breathe through it, clutching her stomach, whispering, "It's too soon, Lord, not yet." But the pain didn't ease. Trembling, she called Miriam, who arrived within minutes, eyes wide with concern. "We need to get you to the hospital. Now." The drive through the winding coastal roads was a blur of rain-slicked streets and panicked prayers. In the ER, nurses moved quickly, voices low but urgent. "Preterm labor," one said. "We'll do everything we can." Elena lay on the gurney, tears streaming, not just from pain, but from fear of being alone in this. Fear that the baby might not be strong enough. Fear that the father who'd finally returned would vanish again at the first real test. She didn't call Daniel. She couldn't bear the thought of him seeing her like this. Weak, vulnerable, fighting for the life she'd carried in secret while he chased another woman's spotlight. But Miriam did. "He has a right to know," she insisted gently, phone already in hand. Daniel answered on the first ring, voice thick with sleep, then sharp with alarm. "I'm on my way." He arrived in rumpled clothes, hair disheveled, no coat despite the rain. He didn't ask for permission. He just stood outside her room, soaked and shaking, until a nurse nodded him in. When Elena saw him, her breath caught. He looked undone, not polished, not composed, just human. "Elena," he whispered, stepping closer. "Are you? Is the baby?" "They're stabilizing me," she said weakly, voice strained. "It's early. Too early." He didn't say, "I'm here," or "You'll be okay." He simply pulled a chair beside her bed, took her hand, carefully as if she might shatter, and said, "Tell me what to do." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the billionaire who'd once walked away for glamour, but a man on his knees, not in posture but in heart. "Pray with me," she said, and so he did, not with grand words, not with rehearsed theology, just raw, trembling honesty. "God, I don't know how to fix what I broke, but if you let this baby live, I'll spend every day making it right. Not for her, for him." Elena closed her eyes, tears slipping down her temples. "His name is Samuel," she whispered, "after my grandfather." Daniel's grip tightened gently. "Samuel," he repeated, as if committing it to his soul. "I'll know you by that name, and I'll never let you doubt you were wanted." Down the hall, in his sterile penthouse miles away, the life Daniel had once clung to, Leah's calls unanswered, board meetings rescheduled, gala invitations declined, felt like a dream he'd finally woken from. Back in the hospital room, the monitors beeped steadily. The contractions slowed. The doctor returned with cautious hope. "We've stopped the progression. Rest, hydration, peace, peace." That night, as rain tapped against the window, Daniel didn't leave. He sat in the dim glow of the hallway light, head bowed, hands still loosely holding hers through the rails of the bed. And Elena, drifting in and out of exhausted sleep, felt something she hadn't in months. She wasn't alone, not just because he was there, but because, for the first time, he was present. Meanwhile, in the quiet hours before dawn, Samuel kicked again. Strong, sure, defiant, as if to say, "I'm still here, and so is he." And Samu Daniel showed up every day, not with flowers or grand speeches, but with groceries, with books on newborn care, with a repaired rocking chair he'd found at a flea market and sanded smooth with his own hands. He never overstepped, never assumed. He simply was steady, present, learning the language of humility one silent gesture at a time. But not everyone celebrated his return. Leah hadn't vanished. She'd been watching, and when whispers reached her, Whitmore's living in Cedar Cove. He's working with that charity. He's back with the pregnant wife. Her pride curdled into something darker. She called Mr. Langford, Daniel's former advisor, under the pretense of concern. "I just think he's being manipulated," she said, voice dripping with false worry. "That Elena, she's not who he thinks. There's a fortune tied to her family. She waited until he left to activate it. Now she's using the baby to reel him back in." Langford, ever loyal to the empire Daniel had built, listened and doubted. A few days later, during a routine board call, he confronted Daniel. "Is it true? Is Harbor Light backed by the Marquez Trust?" Daniel didn't flinch. "Yes. And you didn't think to tell us you were aligning our foundation with a rival legacy fund?" "It's not a rival," Daniel said, voice calm but firm. "It's a partner. And I'm not aligning your foundation. I'm rebuilding mine, on principles, not profit." The board erupted. Accusations flew, conflict of interest, compromised vision, emotional recklessness. Daniel listened. Then he said one thing: "If integrity costs me this company, then it was never mine to keep." He ended the call and walked straight to Elena's cottage. She was on the porch, knitting tiny booties, sunlight warming her face. She looked up as he approached, eyes searching his. "They're turning on me," he said simply, sitting on the step below her. I heard, she replied. Miriam told me Langford's been asking questions. He ran a hand through his hair, weary. Leah's feeding them lies, saying you trapped me, that this is all a scheme. Elena set her knitting down. Do you believe her? He looked at her, really looked, and shook his head. I believed her once, and I lost everything that mattered. I won't make that mistake again. She nodded slowly, then reached into the wicker basket beside her and pulled out a thick file. Then it's time you see the full truth. He frowned. What is this? The Marquez Trust disclosure. Every asset, every clause, every condition. She handed it to him. My grandfather said I could only reveal it when the father of my child proved he valued me. Not my name, not my wealth, but my heart. I think you just did. Daniel opened it with trembling hands. Page after page of holdings, foundations, ethical mandates. At the end, a handwritten note. True legacy is measured not in millions, but in mercy. He looked up, eyes glistening. You could have rebuilt a kingdom alone. I did, she said softly, but I chose to leave the throne empty, in case you ever wanted to sit beside me in the dust instead. Just then, her phone buzzed. A message from Abigail. Leah filed a petition with the press. She's claiming you orchestrated the pregnancy to secure the trust. Tabloids are already calling. Elena's face paled. Daniel stood, jaw set. She's trying to destroy you. No, Elena said, hand on her belly. She's trying to destroy us. But she doesn't know. We're not built on headlines. He knelt before her, taking both her hands. Let me fight this, not as a billionaire, not as a Whitmore, but as Samuel's father. She searched his eyes, saw no pride, only resolve. Then fight with truth, she said. Not anger, not revenge. Truth. That night, Daniel didn't return to his room above the bookstore. He stayed on her porch in a borrowed hammock, watching the stars, guarding the peace she'd built. And inside, Elena prayed, not for protection from the storm ahead, but for the strength to walk through it together. Because the world was about to learn who she really was. And truth buried under glittering rumors. He hadn't slept, couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, the same image returned. A tiny face, blurred but familiar, eyes wide with expectation. His son, looking at him as if to say, did you protect her? Did you stand? Guilt gnawed at him, but deeper than guilt was something new. A father's terror. Inside the cottage, Elena stirred, restless. The baby kicked fiercely, as if sensing the tension coiling in the air. She sat up, hand pressed to her belly, whispering, It's okay, Samuel. We've faced storms before, but this one felt different. Downstairs, the porch floor creaked. Daniel stood, pacing like a man haunted. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out into the cool night. You should be resting, he said immediately, voice rough with worry. So should you, she replied gently. But neither of us can we? He turned to her, eyes shadowed, raw. They're calling you a gold digger, saying you timed the pregnancy to claim the trust, that I'm being played. And what do you believe? She asked, not with accusation, but with quiet courage. He stepped closer, rain beginning to fall in soft drops around them. I believe you carried this child in secret while I abandoned you. I believe you refused every dime I offered because your worth was never tied to my wallet. And I believe, deep in my bones, that if you wanted to trap me, you wouldn't have let me walk away in the first place. Her breath trembled. Then why does it hurt so much? Because lies sting even when you know they're false, he said, voice breaking. And because I put you in a position where the world doubts your integrity, when you've been the only one with any. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the hush of rain and the distant crash of waves. Then, without thinking, he sank to his knees on the wet wood, forehead nearly touching her belly. I'm sorry, he whispered, for every time I chose noise over your voice, for every time I traded your peace for someone else's applause, for not seeing you, really seeing you, until I'd already broken us. Elena placed a hand on his head, fingers threading gently through his damp hair. Redemption isn't about undoing the past, Daniel. It's about building something new on the ruins. Just then, Samuel kicked hard. Daniel gasped, looking up at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. He felt that. He knows his father's voice, she said softly. Even through the pain. Inside the house, the old grandfather clock chimed 2 a.m. The world outside slept, unaware that in this quiet cottage on the edge of the sea, two broken people were stitching a future from threads of grace. Later, as Daniel helped her back inside, she paused at the door. There's something I need to do tomorrow. What is it? I'm going public, she said, voice steady. Not to defend myself, but to protect him. If the world is going to talk about Samuel before he's born, they'll hear the truth. From me. Daniel's heart clenched. Let me stand with you. She looked at him, eyes searching his soul. People will say you're only doing it for image. Then let them, he said. Because for the first time, I don't care what they think. I care what he thinks when he's old enough to read this story. I want him to know his mother was brave, and his father finally learned how to be faithful. She nodded slowly, then reached for his hand. They stood like that for a long moment, two souls bound by regret, hope, and the quiet miracle growing between them. And as the rain softened to a mist, Daniel closed his eyes and prayed. Not with perfect words, but with a shattered heart finally surrendering. God, if I can't fix my past, let me build a future worthy of them. Outside, the storm passed. You, inside, a single page. Financial records, emails, a trail leading straight to a shell company. One Daniel had unknowingly signed off on months ago, during his distracted, Lia-influenced days. Funds had been rerouted, contracts forged, and now auditors were closing in. If exposed, Daniel wouldn't just lose his company, he'd face criminal liability. Her breath caught, not because she feared the scandal, but because she saw the trap. Lia wasn't just trying to smear her. She was setting Daniel up to fall hard and publicly, so he'd have no choice but to crawl back to her for rescue. Elena's fingers trembled as she reread the figures. She could expose this, clear her name, let the world see who really played whom. But then she looked down at her belly, felt Samuel shift, restless, as if sensing her turmoil. Love keeps no record of wrongs, the verse whispered in her memory. She didn't want vengeance. She wanted him whole, honest, free. Without hesitation, she called Abigail. I need you to deliver something, not to the press, not to the board, to Daniel in person. By noon, Daniel stood in her doorway, eyes shadowed with sleepless worry. The tabloids had gone nuclear that morning. Headlines screamed betrayal. His phone hadn't stopped vibrating. Lawyers, investors, even old friends demanding answers. He expected anger, accusation, maybe even triumph. Instead, Elena handed him the folder. What is this? He asked, voice hoarse. Proof, she said simply. Proof that you were used. Proof that the fraud wasn't yours. Proof that someone wanted you to look guilty. He flipped it open. His blood ran cold. Lia, she set me up. She's counting on you to panic, Elena said, stepping closer. To deny, to attack, to disappear. But if you do, you play right into her hands. He looked up at her, stunned. Why are you helping me? After everything? Because I'm not helping you, she interrupted gently. I'm protecting him. She placed a hand on her stomach. Samuel deserves a father with a clean name, not because of wealth or status, but because integrity matters. Daniel's throat tightened. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. I don't deserve this grace. No, she said, kneeling beside him. You don't. But grace isn't about deserving. It's about giving what's needed, not what's earned. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman he'd left for a song, but the woman who carried the weight of two souls with quiet strength. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. You don't fix it alone, she said. You go to the authorities. You confess what you didn't know. You make it right. And I'll stand with you, not as your wife, not yet, but as the mother of your child, and as someone who believes you can still choose the light. Tears spilled down his cheeks. What if I lose everything? You already did, she said softly. And look, you're still here. We're still here. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm gathering. But inside, something quieter stirred. Resolve. That evening, Daniel didn't call his lawyers first. He called the Federal Ethics Hotline. Then he walked to the church, where Elena was already waiting in the dim sanctuary, candles lit along the aisles. He didn't speak, just knelt beside her in the front pew, head bowed. She reached for his hand. Whatever comes, we face it with truth. Acts filled the air as the first worshippers trickled in. Farmers in overalls, mothers with sleepy toddlers, elders with Bibles worn thin by decades of devotion. Elena sat in the third pew, one hand resting on her belly, the other clutching a tissue she hadn't needed. Yet, she'd barely slept, not from fear, but from the strange, trembling sense that today wasn't just another Sunday. It was a hinge. Daniel arrived late, just before the opening hymn, wearing a simple navy sweater and jeans, his eyes shadowed but clear. He didn't sit near her, didn't try to. He took a seat in the very back, as he had every week since he returned, a quiet penitent in a sanctuary not built for spectacle. Then Pastor Miriam stepped to the pulpit. No notes, no flourish, just her steady presence and a voice forged in decades of walking with God through fire and flood. Today, she began, we're going to talk about wealth. A ripple moved through the room. Everyone knew the rumors now. Tabloids, online storms, whispers in the grocery line. They looked at Elena. They glanced back at Daniel. They waited, but Miriam didn't name names. Jesus didn't condemn riches, she said, gaze sweeping the congregation. He condemned trust in riches. He warned that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who depends on money to enter the kingdom of God. She paused, letting the weight settle. But here's what we miss. The real needle isn't in the fabric of heaven. It's in the heart. Because true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, it's measured in character. In mercy, in the willingness to lay down your pride for someone else's healing. Elena's breath caught. She looked down at her hands. Hands that had signed away billions in anonymity, that had kneaded bread for widows, that now sheltered the life of a child whose father had once walked away for applause. Behind her, Daniel sat utterly still. He heard every word like a hammer on stone. Shaping, breaking, revealing. Miriam's voice grew softer, more tender. Some of you came here broken. Some were abandoned. Some gave everything and got nothing back. But God sees the hidden ledger. The tears you cried in silence. The dignity you kept when the world called you nothing. Her eyes found Elena's. Then, just for a heartbeat, Daniel's. And sometimes, she said, voice trembling with holy fire, the richest person in the room is the one who owns nothing, but gives everything. A hush fell. Even the children stilled. Then the choir began to sing, Amazing Grace. And Elena closed her eyes, tears slipping free, not from shame, not from pride, but from the overwhelming sense that she hadn't walked this path alone. And then, she felt it, presence beside her. She opened her eyes. Daniel stood there, hesitant, holding a hymnal like a shield. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the empty space beside her, the seat that had waited all these Sundays for him to be worthy of it. Her heart pounded. She didn't smile, didn't invite, but she moved her purse from the seat. A silent opening, a fragile bridge. He sat, not touching, not speaking, just there. As the congregation sang, his voice joined, rough at first, then stronger. And when the line came, I once was lost, but now am found. His breath hitched, and a tear traced his jaw. Elena didn't look at him, but her hand, resting on the pew between them, trembled, because in that moment, she saw it. Not the billionaire who'd left her for a singer, but the man God had never stopped calling home. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the stained glass dove in radiant light. And inside, Tuso Daniel didn't move closer all at once. He showed up, every day, not with grand declarations, but with small, steady acts. Fixing the porch step that had been loose for years, bringing groceries before Elena could ask, sitting with her in the evenings as she read to Samuel through her belly, his hand resting lightly on her knee, never presuming, always present. And then came the night of the storm, not a metaphorical one, a real tempest, wind howling off the sea, rain lashing the windows like frantic fingers. Elena woke in the dark, gasping, a deep pressure building low in her abdomen. She knew this time, this wasn't a scare. "It's happening," she whispered into the phone, voice tight with fear. Daniel didn't ask questions. He was at her door in 7 minutes, soaked, breathless, eyes wide with the kind of terror only a father-to-be in the final hour could know. "I'm here," he said, helping her into his car, his voice raw but steady. "Just breathe. I've got you." In the hospital room, under the sterile glow of overhead lights, time stretched and snapped like a frayed rope. Contractions came harder, closer. Nurses moved with calm urgency. Elena gripped Daniel's hand so tightly her nails left marks, but he didn't flinch. He leaned close, forehead nearly touching hers. "You're not alone," he whispered. "Not this time." She looked at him through tears, exhaustion and pain etched into every line of her face. "Promise me something. Anything. Don't walk away after this. Not ever again." His throat tightened. "Elena, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I swear on his life, I will never leave you to face anything alone again." She squeezed his hand. "Then stay, right here." Hours later, as dawn bled pink across the sky, Samuel Elijah Marquez Whitmore entered the world with a cry that shattered every illusion Daniel had ever held about power, success, or control. The nurse placed the tiny, squirming bundle in Elena's arms. Then, after a gentle nod from her, into Daniel's. He stood frozen, tears streaming, staring into the face of his son. Nose scrunched, eyes closed, perfect in every fragile way. He's real," Daniel choked out, voice breaking like glass. Elena, exhausted but radiant, reached out and touched Samuel's cheek. "He's been real for months, Daniel. You just couldn't see him." He looked at her then. Not at the baby, but at her. The woman who'd carried their child through abandonment, slander, and silence, and still chose to let him hold his son. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "No," she said softly. "You don't. But he deserves you, the real you, the one who stays." For a long moment, the only sound was Samuel's soft coos and the hum of the hospital at dawn. Then Daniel sank to his knees beside the bed, still cradling his son, and buried his face in the blanket, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When he finally looked up, his eyes were clear, washed clean by more than tears. "I don't want to just be his father," he said, voice steady now, filled with a resolve forged in fire. "I want to be the man you always believed I could be, even when I didn't believe it myself." Elena didn't smile, didn't offer empty promises, but she reached out and placed her hand over his, where it cradled their son. "Then start today," she said, "not with words, with choices." And in that quiet room, as sunlight touched the edge of the bassinet, a new coven, all the ones he'd missed. But today was different. Elena stood in the garden behind the cottage, Samuel asleep in the carrier against her chest, sunlight catching the gold in her hair. She'd worn the dress, the simple ivory one from the gala, the one she'd worn when Daniel first truly saw her again. He found her there, hesitant, holding a small wooden box. "You wanted to talk?" he asked, voice softer than the breeze. She nodded, turning to face him. Her eyes held no anger, but a depth he hadn't seen before. Clear, resolved, anchored. "I've prayed," she began. "Not just for us, but for him, for what kind of father you'll be, what kind of home he'll know." Daniel's chest tightened. "And," she took a slow breath, "I won't marry you again, Daniel." His shoulders dropped, just slightly, as if he'd braced for worse, yet still felt the wound. "I know," he said quietly. I don't expect you to. But, she continued, stepping closer, I won't keep you from him either. Relief and sorrow tangled in his eyes. What does that mean? It means you'll have a place in his life, she said, voice steady but trembling at the edges. Not because of your name, not because of your money, but because you've shown, day after day, that you're willing to earn it. He swallowed hard. How? By choosing him first, she said. Even when it's inconvenient, even when you're tired, even when the world offers you an easier path. Samuel doesn't need a perfect father, Daniel. He needs a present one. And so far, you've been. Tears glistened in his eyes, but he didn't look away. I'll never let him doubt he's loved. Good, she whispered, because love isn't a feeling. It's a promise you keep when no one's watching. Just then, Samuel stirred, tiny fists curling, eyes blinking open. Deep brown, like Daniel's, but with Elena's quiet steadiness. Daniel reached out, and this time, she let him lift the baby from the carrier. He held Samuel close, forehead resting gently against his son's downy hair. He has your courage, Daniel murmured. And your stubbornness? Elena replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. They stood like that for a long while, three souls bound not by legal papers, but by something deeper. Shared pain, hard-won trust, and the fragile miracle of a second chance. Then Elena reached into her pocket and handed him a key. What's this? The cottage garage apartment, she said. It's yours for as long as you choose to stay. Not as my husband, but as Samuel's father. He looked at the key, then at her, eyes shimmering. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said softly. Thank God he gave us both enough grace to find our way back to what matters. Above them, a dove circled once, then landed on the garden arbor, cooing softly, as if blessing the moment. And in the quiet space between heartbeats, Daniel understood. He hadn't lost everything when he walked away. He'd just been given the chance to rebuild something far more valuable, on a foundation not of wealth or image, but of humility, truth, and the quiet, daily act of YS wanted. Daniel stood near the back of the ribbon-cutting gathering, holding a now chubby Samuel on his hip, the boy's tiny fingers gripping his shirt like an anchor. He no longer wore tailored suits or designer watches. Today, he wore a Harbor Light volunteer t-shirt, faded jeans, and the kind of peace that couldn't be bought. Elena moved through the crowd with quiet grace, greeting elders, kneeling to speak with children, her hair catching the afternoon light. She'd cut it short after Samuel's birth, practical now, but her eyes held a deeper radiance, calm, clear, certain. Later, as the sun dipped low and guests began to drift away, she found Daniel by the new butterfly garden. Samuel asleep against his chest, thumb tucked in his mouth. You stayed, she said softly. He looked up. I told you I would. She stepped closer, hands tucked into the pockets of her sweater. I've been thinking about the future. His breath stilled. And I'm not asking you to be my husband, she said, voice steady but tender. But I am asking you to be my partner in raising him, in this work, in walking this path with integrity, side by side. He looked down at Samuel, then back at her. What does that look like? It looks like honesty, she said, like choosing each other not out of guilt or obligation, but because we believe in the same things. It looks like you leading the new Fathers mentorship program here. It looks like me trusting you with hard days, not just easy ones. It looks like building something lasting, even if it's not what we originally planned. A silence settled between them, filled only by the breeze and Samuel's soft breathing. Then Daniel shifted the baby gently into one arm and reached into his pocket. Not with a ring, but with a folded piece of paper. I resigned, he said. Elena blinked. From Whitmore Innovations? From everything, he confirmed. The board offered to keep me on as a silent partner. I said no. I'm done living a life that doesn't align with who I'm becoming. Her eyes filled. What will you do? He glanced around. At the community center. At the families reconnecting over shared meals. At the mural on the wall that read, Let justice roll down like waters. "I'll stay here," he said. "Not because I have to, because I want to. This is where I'm meant to be. Where we're meant to be." She didn't throw herself into his arms, didn't promise forever, but she stepped forward and placed her hand over Samuel's, where it rested against Daniel's chest. "Then let's build it together," she whispered. "Not as the people we were, but as the people God is making us." Just then, Samuel stirred, eyes fluttering open. He looked at Elena, then at Daniel, then let out a gurgling laugh that sounded like Grace made audible. Daniel's voice cracked. "He knows we're his." "Yes," Elena said, tears spilling freely now. "And he knows we're finally choosing each other. Not for what we lost, but for what we can still become." In that quiet garden, as twilight wrapped around them like a promise, two broken souls stood not as lovers rekindled, but as co-laborers, humbled, healed, and gathered beneath strings of fairy lights in the courtyard of the community center, sharing meals grown in the on-site garden, children running barefoot through the grass, laughter rising like incense into the warm summer dusk. Daniel stood near the serving table, apron tied around his waist, spooning stew into bowls, his sleeves rolled up, his hair tousled, his smile easier than it had ever been in boardrooms or galas. He wasn't the man who'd once left his pregnant wife for a singer chasing spotlights. He was the man who now changed diapers at 3 a.m., who prayed with recovering addicts in the basement counseling room, who taught teenage fathers how to hold their newborns without fear. And across the courtyard, Elena watched him. Samuel balanced on her hip, his tiny hand waving at his father. She didn't rush to join him. She let herself feel it, the fullness, the quiet miracle of this ordinary moment. The woman who'd once been abandoned now stood at the heart of a movement built on mercy, her legacy not hidden, but shared. Later, as the sun dipped below the pines, Pastor Miriam called everyone to gather around the old oak tree, the same one that had shaded Daniel and Elena's vows years before. "We're here," Miriam said, her voice warm with emotion, "not to celebrate a building or a foundation, or even a success story. We're here to honor faithfulness, the kind that shows up when no one's watching, the kind that chooses love when it's costly, the kind that rebuilds what pride destroyed." Her eyes swept over the crowd, then settled on Daniel and Elena, standing a few feet apart, Samuel now in Daniel's arms. "Some of you came here broken," she continued. "Some came running from your past. But look around. This is what grace looks like in action." After the blessing, as guests lingered over dessert, Daniel finally walked over to Elena, not with grand words, just with Samuel reaching for her, and a quiet question in his eyes. "He asked for you," he said softly, handing their son over. Elena took Samuel, her fingers brushing Daniel's, just for a second, but it was enough. "He's got your eyes," she murmured. "And your strength," Daniel replied. They stood in silence for a moment, watching families reconnect, neighbors become friends, strangers find hope in a shared meal. "Do you ever wonder," Daniel asked, voice low, "what our life would have been like if I hadn't walked away?" Elena looked at him, not with bitterness, but with peace. "I used to, but now I see it wasn't the walking away that defined us. It was the coming back." He nodded, throat tight. "I spent years chasing a version of success that left me empty. But here, with him, with you, I finally understand what my grandfather tried to tell me." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "That true wealth isn't in what you own," he said, eyes glistening, "but in what you give away, your time, your pride, your heart." Just then, Samuel let out a happy squeal and reached for Daniel's face. Without hesitation, Daniel lifted him again, pressing a kiss to his forehead. And Elena didn't pull back. She stepped closer, just enough so their shoulders touched. No rings, no vows renewed, just two souls who'd walked through fire and chosen, every day since, to build something real. As night fell and stars blinked awake above Cedar Cove, the title of their story, once a scandal, once a wound, now shimmered with quiet truth. The billionaire had left his pregnant wife for a singer, not realizing she was an heir, not just to a fortune, but to a kingdom built on